Welcome to Back to the Bible. I'm Pastor Nat Crawford, and I don't know what you're waiting on these days. Maybe you're waiting in quarantine, or you're waiting to graduate, or just waiting for life to get back to normal. But is there anything harder than waiting? In today's study, you'll be encouraged as you see Noah's willingness to wait and the difference it made, not only for him, but for all of God's people. My discussion partner, Back to the Bible CEO Arnie Cole, will also be here to add some valuable ministry insights. Now, before we begin, I want to say that in these days of social distancing, anger and fear are becoming a prevalent part of the landscape. But God urges us to let go of these damaging emotions and rely on Him for strength and peace. That's why I'd like to send you a copy of my devotional booklet called Win the Day: Daily Steps for Overcoming Anger and Fear. This Devo is our gift to you as a thank you for your financial support. But this offer ends tomorrow, so call soon. The number is 1-800-759-2425. That's 1-800-759-2425. Or, if you prefer to give online, visit backtothebible.org. Now, let's go to our message. Imagine being in house arrest or in quarantine for months. Imagine being locked up with your family and animals for months while the world around you has changed. Wait, I guess you don't have to imagine too hard, do you? The time of waiting on deliverance is hard, but it's doable when you're focused on the one who's in charge. Today, we're wrapping up our time with Noah, a man who consistently chose faith over fear. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of heaven were opened, and the rain fell upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day, Noah and his sons, Shem and Ham and Japheth, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them entered the ark. They and every beast according to its kind, and all the livestock according to their kinds, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth according to its kind, and every bird according to its kind, every winged creature. They went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2 of all flesh, in which these were the breath of life. And those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded them, and the Lord shut them in. Genesis chapter 8, verse 1. But God remembered Noah, and all the beasts and all the livestock that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind blow over the earth, and the waters subsided. The fountains of the deep and the windows of the heavens were closed, and the rain from the heavens was restrained. And the waters receded from the earth continually. And at the end of 150 days the waters had abated. And on the 17th day of the month, the ark came to rest on the mountain of Ararat. And the waters continued to abate until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day of the month, the tops of the mountains were seen. Here in the first 5 verses of chapter 8, we begin to see a glimmer of hope for Noah and all that are on the ark. Genesis 8 reminds us that the rescinding of the water was gradual. We see a timeline here as we did in the other chapters, which honestly, I think can get a little bit confusing. But it's not meant to be. It's meant to be helpful. So just to summarize, after 5 months, the water is decreasing. After 7 months, the ark finally comes to rest on Mount Ararat. Now, it would take longer for the waters to decrease to the point where Noah could see the other dry land around him. And now let's turn back to verse 6 to see what else is going to transpire. At the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made and sent forth a raven. It went to and fro until the waters were dried up from the earth. Then he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters had subsided from the face of the ground. But the dove found no place to set her foot, and she returned to him to the ark, for the waters were still on the face of the whole earth. So he put out his hand and took her and brought her into the ark with him. He waited for another 7 days, and again he sent forth the dove out of the ark. And the dove came back to him in the evening, and behold, in her mouth was a freshly plucked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the waters had subsided from the earth. Then he waited another 7 days and sent forth the dove, and she did not return to him any more. Friends, I want you to notice something here. Noah and the ark met dry land on the mountain in modern-day Turkey. There is land, but does Noah open the door? Does he go running out? No. Why? Because Noah's not like us. Because think about it. What do we do when we land in an airplane? As soon as we're on the ground at a casual pace, or for sure as soon as the sign turns off, what do? We get unbuckled, we unbuckle our seatbelt, we stand up, we start grabbing our stuff. We act as if we stand up sooner and we act like we're ready to go, that the door is just going to open. But that's not Noah. In verse 6, it says, at the end of 40 days. At the end of 40 days, Noah opened up the window or a hatch. As I'm reading that sounds crazy to me. They hit dry land, and he waits 40 days, and then he opens up a window to let out a bird to try to find dry land. Noah goes through this exercise several times until the dove doesn't come back. You see, that's the difference between Noah and us. Noah had this posture of faith over fear. I'd be honestly going stir crazy. As soon as we hit dry land, I'd be busting through the doors and putting on a swimming suit and jumping in. But not Noah. He chooses faith in God. He keeps doing the next thing, whatever the next thing that God would have him to do. I want to pause here and just ask you the question. How are you doing with this today? If you're being honest with yourself, how are you doing with waiting on God? Not to disappoint you, but I am terrible at this. I honestly don't like waiting on God. My personality is that I'm a driver, I'm a doer, I'm a let's go and let's get this done kind of guy. I mean, fast is my only pace. So waiting on God and His timing is so incredibly hard for me. But what I keep experiencing is God's blessing when I do wait on Him. For example, me being back to the Bible is a result of waiting on God. It was in June of 2019 I knew my tenure as a teaching pastor at my church, that it was coming to an end. I didn't know for sure where that would take me. I honestly thought for sure I'd be a lead pastor of a church. But as I candidated at churches across the U.S., I began to entertain church planting opportunities and lead pastor opportunities, teaching pastor opportunities. But as the offers came in, my wife and I prayed and we talked, and we honestly felt that we weren't meant to leave the ark yet. We could have left. We could have ran off to some other church, some other opportunity. We could have accepted any number of offers, but we didn't feel like God was calling us to go yet. Then, in late October, I got a call from CEO Back to the Bible, Arnie Cole. Arnie asked me, Nat, have you accepted any lead pastor jobs yet? I said, no, Arnie, I haven't. But Arnie, how do you even know who I am? I had no idea how he knew who I was. I knew who he was, but I had no idea that he had ever heard of me. But through that conversation and following conversations, after careful prayer and discussion with my wife, we recognized that this was the go from God. We waited on God and waited for His go, and that was one of the best decisions we've ever made. Waiting on God is a real act of faith over fear. There is no doubt about it. And Noah, he is living it out in this story. Now, we haven't seen the results yet of his patience, his waiting on God, but I did share with you a recent story from my own life of waiting on God. So, Arnie, I really think our listeners value from hearing real-life application and our own stories about how God has worked in our life. So I'd like to ask you, how have you seen God bless your life because of your patience, your waiting on God?
You know, I'd like to say that it's a real pretty story, but actually my blessing comes after I've tried to do it myself. I've been impatient, try to make things happen, and then when everything else fails, and I'm exhausted, and then I look and I see, oh, wow, if I just waited on God to see his work, it's just sometimes it's so slow. I mean, I can't imagine being Noah, just waiting. And what are you talking about with your wife? 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. It's just that determination and focus on the Lord. But for me, oddly enough, hindsight is much easier to see God's working than the present, for me anyways, because it's so slow moving. I would have had the ark built 40 times, wrong, probably 39 times. And then, maybe I need to look at the plans. It's just, I think some of us are type A's, and then we try to make things happen. So it's a tremendous lesson.
It is. And boy, I think you have talked to every man that's listening, and they just hit themselves in the head and say, man, he nailed it. And every wife who's listening probably just elbowed her husband and said, see, why are you doing it that way? But I think that is honestly most of our stories, that we have a hard time waiting on God. And we do tend to run ahead of God. But by his grace today, he pulls the rug out from under us and allows us to realize, oh no, I didn't build the ark. I actually built a really junky garage or a really junky, whatever it is. I'm not handy, so I won't build anything if you ask me. That means God will probably ask me to do it. But no, I think you've really spoken to a lot of people right now that resonate with that. But what about as a ministry? I mean, you've been at the helm here at Back to the Bible for some time. Where we got to today was not because it happened overnight. It took time and waiting on God. So share a little bit about your perspective on waiting on God as a ministry.
That has been a tremendous struggle, I would say, and has caused me days of wondering and never doubting the Lord. Maybe doubting myself sometimes, especially those things that you think you're doing what the Lord's called the ministry to do, and you're headed in the right direction, and then bad things happen. And I'm not talking about bad things related to donations or something like that. I'm talking about fellow believers behaving poorly or doing things that are just way out left field kind of stuff. And then just wondering, Lord, where are you in this? Yeah, it's been a real challenge, but never doubting the Lord. It's just always doubting my timing, if that makes sense, not his.
100%. Yeah, I think we all struggle with God's timing and knowing when is the right moment to act. I want to take a moment to remind you that your gifts to Back to the Bible make it possible to share biblical truth on a daily basis. Truth that encourages people through these challenging times. So today, to thank you for your gift to this ministry, I want to send you a copy of a devotional booklet I wrote called Win the Day: Daily Steps for Overcoming Anger and Fear. Listen, anger and fear, they are go-tos for many of us. But God warns us repeatedly about these damaging emotions. He urges us to rely on Him for strength and peace rather than lash out in anger or hide in crippling fear. These are such important principles to understand in times like this. So be sure to request your copy of Win the Day: Daily Steps for Overcoming Anger and Fear. Call 1-800-759-2425. This offer ends tomorrow, so call now. 1-800-759-2425. Or if you prefer to give online, visit backtothebible.org. That's backtothebible.org. Now here's more of today's message. Let's continue now by turning back to Genesis chapter 8, beginning in verse 13. In the 601st year, in the first month, the first day of the month, the waters were dried from off the earth. And Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. In the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth had dried out. Then God said to Noah, "Go out from the ark, you and your wife and your sons wives with you." Finally, there it is. The waiting is over. God tells Noah, "Go." Noah's been waiting in the ark on God's directive, and after 1 year and 11 days, finally, Noah gets the word, "Go." I just love Noah and his commitment to trusting in God. Just look as it continues in verse 17. "Bring out with you every living thing that is with you of all flesh, birds and animals and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, that they may swarm on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth." So Noah went out, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him. Every beast, every creeping thing, and every bird, everything that moves on the earth went out by families from the ark. So God says, "Go. And while you are going, get those animals out the door and into the world so that they can populate the earth." And so they did. Let's look at verse 20. "Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took some of every clean animal and some of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, the Lord said in his heart, 'I will never again curse the ground because of man. For the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done. While the earth remains, seedtime and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease.'" Friends, I don't know what you're thinking, but I think Noah is something else. And I mean that in a good way. Noah, he gets out of the ark. He gets the animals out of the ark just like God asked. But he doesn't do what I would do. He gets the animals out just like God had asked. He doesn't go out and play ball with the boys. He doesn't go and cast a line in the lake to go fish. He doesn't even go for a jog to get those legs moving. What does he do? He immediately builds an altar to worship God. You see, Noah wasn't just about obeying God and waiting on God. No, he was all about worshiping God. And then, in chapter 9, God gives Noah and his family a directive that he gave Adam and Eve: be fruitful and multiply. You see, that was God's first command to Adam and Eve: have sex and make babies. And then God says this in chapter 9: "I now establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that was with you, the birds, the livestock, and all the wild animals, and all those that came out of the ark with you, every living creature on earth. I establish my covenant, my promise with you. Never again will all life be destroyed by the waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth." And God said, "This is the sign of the covenant I am making between me and you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations to come. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I bring clouds over the earth and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of every kind. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures of every kind on the earth." So God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant I have established between me and all life on the earth." God makes an unconditional covenant or a promise with Noah. 3 times. 3 times God promised to never again destroy the earth by flood. No matter how sinful, no matter how bad it gets, God would not destroy the earth again. But because he knows people forget, he provides a sign: the rainbow. The rainbow was never meant to be political or divisive. It was meant to be an anchor or a reminder of God's faithfulness and promise. When you see a rainbow today, it always has been a sign of God's promise. He will never destroy the earth like he did in the time of Noah. That's his promise. The rainbow, I don't know if you've noticed this, it's in the shape of a bow. And as you know, the bow was a weapon of war. It is still used for hunting and killing today. But I love what Pastor Warren Wiersbe said about the rainbow. He said it's a covenantal sign. In fact, Wiersbe said this, and I quote, "God has transformed the bow into a picture. It's a picture of His grace and faithfulness, a guarantee of peace. God could certainly turn the bow of judgment upon us because we have broken His law and deserve judgment. But listen to this. He has turned the bow toward heaven and taken the punishment for us Himself. Because God sent His Son for us, we do not need to fear death. We do not need to fear suffering. We don't need to fear the trials of life. Why? Because God in the flesh has paid the penalty for sin. Because of that, we can rest in God's grace. Because of God's past faithfulness and the signposts that He displays, those anchors, we can daily choose faith over fear.
So, Nat, give us some advice on how to wait on God. I mean, that is such a critical thing. What do you do? What do you tell people? What do you recommend to people how they can wait on God?
Trying to understand God's timing, whether to go or whether to wait. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
That is a hard question to answer because it's so personalized. I mean, I've been asked that question, I don't know how many times in counseling sessions. Here's what I generally say. If what you are going to act on is sinful, don't do it. Meaning there's probably a longer way, a way that means more waiting and more patience on God, and that's harder. So we can always find a fast route, but it often could be sinful for various reasons. Apologist Ravi Zacharias once said, "Sin is meeting a legitimate need in an illegitimate way." That happens a lot when it comes to waiting on God. So I think the first question to ask is, by me making this decision now, is this going to be sinful? And then look at your heart, because it may not be very blatantly obvious that, hey, you know what, this probably is sinful, but if you actually look at your heart and where your heart's at, it may be. Second, I always encourage people, seek godly counsel. Talk to your friends or family members, pastor, consultants who are godly people who use the Word of God as their grid, and ask them their insight. Again, this is so specific to an individual scenario. It's hard to prescribe exactly what to do. But I would say, again, evaluate it, whether it's sinful or not. Second, seek counsel. Third, turn to the Bible and see what the Bible would have to say on this subject. And fourth, I would say pray. Ask God for discernment on how to act with wisdom and in a way that honors God. We have to do it that way, because otherwise we're running ahead of God like you talked about, like we've both experienced. It's not fun to fall flat on our face because we ran ahead of God. It's much better to wait patiently, even if it means a year and 11 days like Noah did in the ark. But his timing was perfect and the results were good. And I think you and I can say honestly, when we have waited on God, it is worth the wait, and God works it to our benefit and all to His glory. Thank you for listening to Back to the Bible. I'll be back tomorrow with apologist Dr. Clay Jones for a fascinating conversation about what it means to choose faith over fear. Do not miss it. And, of course, don't miss your chance to request a copy of Win the Day, Daily Steps for Overcoming Anger and Fear. This is a devotional booklet I wrote to help you rise above damaging emotions and move forward in faith during challenging times. And today, we'd like to send you a copy as a thank you for your gift to support Back to the Bible. But this offer does end tomorrow, so make your request soon. Call 1-800-759-2425. That's 1-800-759-2425. Or to give online, visit backtothebible.org. That's backtothebible.org. That's all for today. I'm Nat Crawford for Back to the Bible, encouraging you to stand firm, stand faithful, and stand on God's Word. If today's episode has helped you move forward in faith, be sure to share it with a friend. And would you consider leaving a rating or review? We'd love to hear from you.